I'm in there? Okay. So I'll just sit over there.
Well, we start back here anyway. I just need this first part. I have to remember.
So we are using this mic?
This mic is live because it's opening out the choir and the down projector. But we'll just trade speaking on that one.
Okay. But I mean, during the service, I sit. Yeah, that's fine.
Whenever, I think we have hymns and usually Tara stands and sings on the vocals. So I get away from the mic while singing so we can trade places. But I mean, I think that's a power chord there. But this isn't official. Let's go get some cold. Some water. it is water, but my first husband used to chew tip. He really didn't want to use the wrong person's cup.
Oh no, yeah. When I was starting college, our roommate
Disgusting.
there were spittoons everywhere. It was disgusting.
It's things that aren't spittoons that are creepy. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they weren't spittoons. They were like cups from 7-Eleven.
Right? Look normal.
Oh wow.
Should we go? Good morning. I'm Terry Trendler. Welcome. Come in to our house of hope and love, of peace and justice, of wholeness and healing. We welcome the certain and the seeking, the long-timers and the newcomers, the beloved and the brokenhearted. All of you can find a home at Throop, where we go love the world from the heart of Pasadena. And from the heart of our homes, welcome this morning to all our friends on the live stream. Today, our minister, Reverend Tara, is away. She'll be back September 2nd, but we're pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Pastor Joshua Berg. Pastor Joshua is an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister, and he is currently working as a chaplain at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And as of this year, he's very excited that Throop voted to make him our affiliate community minister. Yeah, you can be in the member too. If you're new to Throop, we would love to stay connected with you. There is an information card in the pews in front of you, and if you are online, please sign our digital guest book. Welcome. We're so glad that you're here.
Each one of us is a light in the world. The flame from our chalice symbolizes and reflects that light. Our time together in worship is intimately connected with our daily lives. And as a symbol of that connection, we light our chalice with love, with compassion, and justice. And with these words from Reverend Erica Hewitt called "Until All Means All." The chalice, as a symbol of Unitarian Universalism, arose as a beacon of hope in an atmosphere of tyranny. The chalice arose as a sign of promise that the marginalized would never be forgotten nor ignored, because they are beloved and precious from the perspective of the holy. This morning we remember all of the people who have been told explicitly or implicitly through police violence or government policy, through derision or dehumanization, that they're anything less than whole, anything less than beloved. And as we each light a chalice in our homes as well, may we make of our lives a beacon, a symbol of our promise to draw the circle wide, a sign that we will not rest until all means all. And we light a second candle to honor the people and ancestors whose lands we now occupy. The land under and around Throop was once and is still the home of the Gabrielino Tongva Band of Mission Indian people. May this knowledge and awareness lead us into seeking justice and equity for all. And we light a third candle, symbolizing our watershed, the Arroyo Seco. May their waters continue to nourish life in our communities. And we take a moment of silence, holding all of these in our hearts. We continue with hymn number 188. Come, come, whoever you are.
If you are willing to stand and air out your arms, please pick up the gray hymnal to 188. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving.
Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
And now is your chance, if you're feeling social, to flit around saying hello. Maybe no bear hugs this morning, but if you're a little overheated, please feel free to stay resting in your pew. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come back to your pew. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come. Thank you, Megan. This morning we have a responsive reading which was written by Reverend Susan Frederick Gray on June 29th, 2017, and Erica Hewitt has based this reading on it. The congregation has a line to say, and it is, "No one is outside the circle of love." That's in your order of worship if you need to follow along, but let's try it once together. No one is outside the circle of love. We know that hurt moves through the world, perpetuated by action, inaction, and indifference. Our values call us to live in the reality of the heartbreak of the world, remembering that no one is outside the circle of love. We who are Unitarian Universalists not only affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we also affirm the inherent wholeness of every being, despite apparent brokenness. No one is outside the circle of love. We know that things break or break down: promises, friendship, sobriety, hope, communication. This breaking happens because our human hearts and our very institutions are frail and imperfect. We make mistakes. Life is messy. No one is outside the circle of love. With compassion as our guide, we seek the well-being of all people. We seek to dismantle systems of oppression that undermine our collective humanity. We believe that we're here to guide one another toward love. No one is outside the circle of love. No matter how fractured we are or once were, we can make whole people of ourselves. We are whole at our core because of the great, unnameable, sometimes inconceivable love in which we live. No one is outside the circle of love. And now we're going to try to give a lesson in audio visual.
group of people what they know about Clara Barton, you tend to get two answers. The first answer is she was the founder of the American Red Cross, and the second answer is that she was a Civil War nurse, and both of those things are absolutely correct. But to limit Clara Barton to only those two things really limits a person who in many ways probably has more of an effect on the 21st century than anyone can imagine. She is the one that proposed what is called the American Amendment that brought to play the Red Cross worldwide to relieve suffering in all types of natural disasters. This was a revolution, and we can't imagine the 21st century without it. When we see news reports about hurricanes, about tsunamis, about tornadoes, about natural disasters of all types, we can't imagine that the Red Cross wouldn't be there. When you come to her offices, the missing soldiers office, you're really coming into a place that was first and foremost a boarding house. It was her home. It's where she lived. And a boarding house is a place that, quite frankly, in the 19th century was not for the wealthy or even the well-to-do or even the upper middle class. This was a place of relatively modest means. She began from these rooms not only living here, but then collecting supplies that she would take onto the battlefields at places like Antietam and Fredericksburg and many other. Past that, this office then transformed yet again. It became a place of lobbying. It became a place from which she would go to the halls of power and lobby on behalf of the soldiers who were sick and wounded and their families. Eventually, it would be transformed again at the end of the war in 1865 to the Missing Soldiers Office, a place where people in desperation trying to find their loved ones came to Claire and say, "We know you've been in the hospitals. Have you seen our son? Do you know where my husband is? Do you know where my brother is?" She was the first person in America to actually step up and say, "We need to find these missing soldiers." We're inviting people to come and learn what she did, to learn how she did it, and finally to step up and take actions themselves by becoming a volunteer, by taking on a task that takes her story out of the 19th century and puts it onto the streets of the 21st century that are then transformed by her story, transformed from just average people to people of action.
Annie Bizzle Jordan Willis. She was born on May 30th, 1893 in Lewisburg, North Carolina. Miss Annie was a teacher and spent most of her life running a school in Virginia which gave African American children equal access to a quality education long before Brown versus the Board of Education. Miss Annie's father, Joseph Fletcher Jordan, became a Universalist because they believed that every person is universally saved. Jordan was one of the first African American Universalist ministers in America. In 1904, Annie B. Jordan and her father moved with the rest of their family to Suffolk, Virginia, where her father took over control of the Suffolk Normal Training School. Annie B. Jordan started teaching in that school when she was a teenager and just never left. When her father passed away, Miss Annie took control of the school. The Jordan Normal Training School, as it was later renamed, started as a Universalist mission school to educate African American children in that community who were not allowed to attend neighborhood schools due to segregation. But the Jordan Normal Training School offered a quality education to all children and actually became a model of integration with both Black and white students more than 30 years before public schools were forced to integrate. And it was a wonderful school. Many graduates went on to become very successful and important members of their community. Miss Annie stayed at the school through many changes in names and vision. When the Universalists who favored long-term mission projects like the school merged with the Unitarians who preferred short-term mission work, the school lost even more of its support. But Annie B. Jordan Willis kept the school open with fundraising until she retired in 1974. Remember, her family first became involved with the school 70 years before that. Her last words to her successor at the school were, "Watch out for my children." The school lasted 7 more years after her death. Annie B. Jordan Willis was a Universalist and a gifted educator. She was remembered most fondly for her loving and kind nature and firm commitment to anti-racism and providing equal opportunity to all children.
Two of our Universalist ancestors, Clara Barton and Annie B. Jordan Willis. And we'll do a short reflection reading now from another Universalist ancestor. He wrote a book called A Religion for Greatness, and his name is Clarence R. Skinner. Clarence Skinner, he was the preeminent social prophet of the Universalist Church during the first half of the 20th century. A pacifist during the First World War, a supporter of organized labor, Skinner was frequently shunned by his colleagues because of his politics, but always respected and admired for his honesty and his integrity. As he approached retirement in 1945, Skinner offered his vision of the message that the Universalist Church had to present in his book, A Religion for Greatness. And this reading comes from the chapter on racism. It is presented as Skinner wrote it without changing gender references that were common parlance at the time. The religion of the unities and universals, he wrote, is a radical cure. It gets down to the roots out of which prejudice grows. It digs into the soil of man's selfishness, superstitions, and distortions. It destroys the vicious partialisms which would lock men into divisive cells of race, denying them the common rights of humanity. This enemy must be routed on every front: economic, social, biological, and cultural. And the only way to rout it, he wrote, is to supplant the fears and errors of partialism by a vigorous, realistic religion of universalism. For every denial, we must make an assertion. Man must enlarge the borders of his consciousness to include the human race. We must think, feel, and act in universal terms, and thus see how petty and sinful are the partialisms of our lesser selves. We must welcome differences, because life in a varied world is richer than life in uniformity. We must recognize the rightful place of color, shape, and history in a syncretic culture. If we see life steadily and see it whole, we can appreciate all the parts. The part becomes misunderstood only when we see it without relationships, as an end in itself. Once race is no more necessary than one kind of tree or one kind of horse, one race is no more necessary than one kind of tree or one kind of horse. Each has its own genius, and each may contribute to a life that is rounded, divine, complete. It is a time for greatness. There must be a religion for greatness to meet the needs of the time.
this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of freedom. Guardian of dignity and worth held deep inside us. Let this be our house, a platform for the free voice, where all our sacred differences you shall not divide us. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let all in this house seek truth, where scientists and mystics abide in reverence here. Let this be our house, a house of our creation, where works of art and melodies consecrate the atmosphere. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of prophecy. May vision for our children be our common theme. Let this be our house, a myth and lore and legend, our trove of ancient story and cradle of our tender dreams. Let this be a house of peace. 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 Let this be a house of peace.
Thank you, choir. This is our church. We support it with our gifts of time, our gifts of talent, and our gifts of treasure. You can give online. The link will be in the live stream chat and also the order of worship. If you're here in the room, you can place your donation in the offering plate, which Marissa will be soon bringing by. And if you'd like your donation to count towards your annual pledge, please use the green envelopes in the pew to write your name on it and let us know. If you're a first-time visitor, please let the plate pass you by. Thank you for supporting our life together. The offering will now be gratefully received.
Break not the circle of enabling love, where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not that circle, make it wider still, till it includes, embraces all the living. Break not the circle of enabling love, where words of freedom are with humor spoken, and people keep no score of wrong or guilt, but will that human bonds for remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till people of whatever race or nation will truly be circle of enabling love.
Thank you all. The video of the Universalist ancestors makes me so proud to be Unitarian Universalist, but also the people who participate today in Unitarian Universalism. And I would like to thank some of them who have helped lead our worship today. So in a spirit of gratitude, we lift up our thanks to Taryn, who is our live stream operator, Terry, our worship associate, Marissa, our greeter. Where is she? At back, okay. Megan on music, and Fillory for administrative support, and our amazing, amazing choir. Thank you all. As we give thanks for this offering and all the ways we support our Throop community life, say with me the words in your order of service. For the ministries of the church in our community, we bless our offering with love and hope.
And if you will follow along with our promise to the planet, it's in your order of worship. As members of the family of living beings on earth, we are guided by the Unitarian Universalist principle of respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. With hearts filled with love for it, eyes nurtured by its beauty, and minds ruminating on ways to protect its sacred and scarce resources, we promise to nurture the well-being of all life and of the planet itself. Our centering hymn is in the teal hymnal. It's number 1052, The Oneness of Everything. Please remain seated.
Of hands, or light to meet the eye, past the reaches of the mind. There find the key to nature's harmony in an architecture so entwined. Birds whose patterns grace the sky and carry all who join love expanding. The message of peace will rise in flight, taking the weight of the world upon its wings. In the oneness of everything, peace is in the dance of trees who stir before the first breath of wind is yet perceived. Trust in the song becoming one with the dance, and all mysteries can be believed. Songs of lives of past that touch our own are written in the earth ever giving, and now to maintain the harmony gives to us all lives worth living, for the oneness of everything. Still we seek to find a truth that we might understand and reduce to terms defined. Vast and unmeasurable the time and space, so overwhelmingly designed.
Here are some words to meditate upon from Neil deGrasse Tyson. The very atoms and molecules in our bodies are traceable to the crucibles in the centers of stars that once upon a time exploded into gas clouds. And those gas clouds formed other stars, and those stars possess the divine right mix of properties needed to create not only planets, including our own, but also people, including us. deGrasse Tyson is saying that not only are we in the universe, but that the universe is in us. He is saying that we human beings are literally made out of stardust.
I'm glad salvation is free. I'm glad salvation is free. Salvation is free for you and for me. I'm glad salvation is free. Can't you see how they're done, my Lord? Can't you see how they hung him at Calvary? Well, they whipped him up all night long for you and for me, and he never said a mumbling word. And the sun refused to shine, and the blood ran down, child, and the dead got up, child, from the grave, and they walked around and they moaned. I'm glad salvation is free. I'm glad salvation is free. Salvation is free for you and for me. I'm glad salvation is free.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So some of you may have heard what I'm about to say, this cliche phrase. It's said of Unitarians in early 19th century America, they believed that men like themselves were too good to be damned. Universalists, on the other hand, believed that God was too good to damn them, that all could be saved. And this message of universal salvation, of universal love, has been preached in some form or another in America from at least the time of John Murray, the founder of the first American Universalist Church in Massachusetts, at the end of the 19th century, and 100 years this year in this very church, until the present day. Now, this Universalist message, as a Christ-centered message of salvation from sin. And it is now a more humanist message of liberation. However, its foundations, they remain quite consistent. The ideal is that universal salvation, or in the vernacular of today, liberation, is free, as Megan's saying, is available for all. What is often missed in this message is that at its core, it is also about sacrifice, and action. Embodied today in the sacrifice each of us makes through compassion and, most importantly, action for liberation of the other, can we all be saved? Can we all be liberated? Over 2 centuries ago, in a letter to a Dr. Richard Price, the prominent Unitarian Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence and himself an early convert to Universalism, he wrote this in that letter. He wrote that these principles, my dear friend, have bound me to the whole human race. These are the principles which animate me in all my labors for the interests of my fellow creatures. No particle of benevolence, no wish for the liberty of a slave or the reformation of a criminal will be lost. None. And over 200 years later, for modern Universalists, the directive he insisted upon them is the same. Liberation theology says that one cannot follow any faith that preaches universal salvation without addressing social justice concerns. That benevolence towards others is essential. Ernest Cassara edited this book, Universalism in America, a documentary history of liberal faith. And in his introduction to chapter 6, he writes, "The conscience of universalism, it should be expected that a gospel which preached the ultimate salvation of every individual in the future life would be concerned with the lot of people on earth." And social reform has indeed been a through line through American Universalist history in the 19th century, with Dr. Rush, with Horace Greeley, with Clara Barton, with others, into the 20th and the 21st century on to today. In fact, one of the most prominent 20th century Universalist reformers was someone I read earlier, Clarence Skinner. And his goal was the irrevocable connection between religion and the social issues surrounding it. In his 1915 statement, The Social Implications of Universalism, he stated, "All great social problems involve theological conceptions. As man," he wrote, "attains increasing democracy, he conceives God as being more and more and more universal, more just, more intimately associated with life. And as God is conceived to be more universal, just, and intimate, the idea begets more democracy amongst men. Social action and theological reaction are equal and in the same direction," he wrote. Now, what does he mean by God? Well, it is similar to what so many present-day UUs refer to as spirit of life. Is it similar to that? That was a question mark at the end there. Is it similar to what so many UUs refer to as spirit of life? Is it the love centered in our new Article 2 reframing? Well, Clarence Skinner tells us what he means by God. It is the universalist idea of God is that of universal, impartial, immanent spirit whose nature is love. That's what he wrote back then. It is the largest thought the world has ever known. It is the most revolutionary doctrine ever proclaimed. It is the most expansive hope ever dreamed. This is no tribal deity of ancient divisive civilization. This is no God of the nation of a chosen people, but the democratic creator of the solid, indivisible world of rich and poor, of black and white, of good and bad, of strong and weak, of Jew and Gentile, of bond and free, and I would argue a world that is not represented in those binaries, but in between and beyond them. Skinner's statement was followed soon after by a social program at the Universalist General Convention in 1917, which declared this: the purpose of the Universalist Church to be the reconstruction of the world's civilization in terms of justice, peace, and righteousness, so that the spiritual life of all may develop to its fullest capacity. It wanted guarantees back then of equal housing, education, food, recreation. It called for economic equity and condemned economic monopoly and exploitation and war. It railed against the injustices that brought about misery, disease, accidents, ignorance, crime. Its program was meant to complete humanity. Our Universalist legacy, which is that, does not just claim, therefore, that all can be saved, that all can be free. Since all can be free, our faith demands that all must be free, and further continues to call each of us to realize that through action. And we today are maturing in how we understand the process of social justice. As much as UUism has been focused on the individual within the society around them, our focus today has turned toward the individual as part of the society, one person irrevocably interconnected to a greater community of communities. And we today are also acknowledging that not only are UUs not the final arbiters of appropriate behavior, but we ourselves are guilty of inappropriate conduct toward our fellow humans. We are realizing that just as universal salvation in the Christological sense was salvation from sin, true equity in the humanist sense, universal liberation, cannot be achieved without an honest accounting of our own sins. And to that end, we look back on our predecessors, the same people who wrote all these words I've quoted, and we recognize that even though they were abolitionists, and they were pacifists, and they were social reformers, they too were influenced by a colonial white supremacist culture. Their relationship to people of color was fraught with dysfunction, prejudice, and it remains today for white people of privilege. It is this new awareness and willingness to be accountable that gives me hope in the actual progress toward a radically equitable society. This awareness. For too long, we ignored the fact that our faith rests on a, quote, culture whose economic structures depend on the annihilation of indigenous peoples and the enslavement of Africans forcibly relocated and enslaved. We can't ignore this no longer. We couldn't ignore it, and we can't ignore it. For too long, we have hyper-focused on the individual free and responsible search for truth and meaning, rather than communal repair. One of our most prominent theologians, James Luther Adams, or JLA as we used to say in seminary, stated this quite succinctly when he said, "The faith of free persons must tangibly make them free in a community of human dignity and equal justice." Paula Cole Jones developed our 8th principle so that we renew that commitment to this work, to hold ourselves accountable, to fulfill the potential of our existing principles. And that brings me to one final document I want to reference, which I'm sure you've heard of, one that completes the line from then to now and continues, I should say, the line from then to now and demonstrates our newfound awareness, and one I have already quoted herein. It is the document Widening the Circle of Concern, and that was the report from our Commission on Institutional Change. The point of the work is to center voices within our faith that have gone unheard for too long. One of our youth leaders, Paloma Cayo, is quoted in the report from a homily she delivered in 2016. She wrote, "Only when we come to bear witness to the cracked and shattered pieces can we begin to heal what has been broken." Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, our new president of the UUA, relates this to our Universalist theology in this way. They wrote, "Only a Universalist theology of liberation in the present day centers our capacity to be sanctuaries of radical truth-telling and abundant compassion, so that the all-embracing love at the center of our tradition can serve to make all of us more whole." The document came about, widening the circle, after a racially charged incident in 2017. Our leaders of color were then asked by the co-presidents of the UUA, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt and Reverend William Singford at the time, and Dr. Leon Spencer, to share insights into how the Unitarian Universalist Association could continue moving forward. This was, as the report puts it, a request for truth and reconciliation. So a commission was formed, which included Reverend Leslie Takahashi, Mary Byron, Sir Labert Jr., Reverend Dr. Natalie Fenimore, Dr. Elias Ortega, Caitlin Breedlove, and Doro K. Farrar, and was project managed by Reverend Marcus Fogliano. And these people took these insights, and over 3 years they analyzed them. They audited the power structures, systematic racism, and white supremacy culture within the UUA, and they reported back, along with another accounting of how our association has or has not grown and changed over those 3 years, because 3 years is a long time. They laid out recommendations for supporting long-term cultural and institutional change that, quote, redeems the essential promise and ideals of Unitarian Universalism. They understood very well that our theological underpinnings, which connect us to our predecessors, demand that we do this work. Under this section, a word about centering connects this work to the compassion and sacrifice I mentioned earlier, that is the overlooked yet key to universal liberation. It writes, "Honoring the experience and discernment will require that we cultivate compassion, and it would help to look at the etymology of that word, compassion, cum meaning with or together, and passion derived from pati, which means endure, undergo, experience. Can we feel what others experience? Compassion. It continues later in the same section. By centering, we meaning leaning toward, a prioritizing of perspective, attention to those whose needs are considered and who is most affected. And this is not done easily, let me tell you. It is not done without necessary action, sacrifice, and pain, that others who have sacrificed and hurt for too long are freed from their burdens. Only then can we all be liberators from our burdens as well. Dr. Elias Ortega, a member of that commission, I said, and who is the current president of my alma mater, Meadville Lombard, and one of our 2 remaining UU theological schools, the others here in California, Star King. He talks as well about sacrifice and action and community in this report. He writes, if we believe in collective salvation, and everyone's salvation is free, it is powerful that our faith community is working to reclaim this sacred practice. And claiming what is meant to be sacred in personal sacrifice without the power of we is the very thing that desecrated the practice. So I'll conclude with the words of Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt again, who writes, we are the theological inheritors of teachings of universal salvation, which I've talked about. There is no winnowing out of the supposedly unworthy that can be named sacred among us. It is our very universalism that is at stake when we turn away from the impact that our institutions have on the same communities and groups that society encourages us to dehumanize and make small. Freedom for all through sacrifice and action is how we must live our universalist faith. The same universal love that Dr. Benjamin Rush described in 1790 is what we continue to strive for today as 21st century Universalists and Unitarian Universalists, as delineated in our new Article 2 bylaws and principles. It is love that is interdependent, that is equitable, that is transformative, that is pluralistic, that is generative, that is generous. Love that finally takes action towards justice. That is our universalist legacy. Hymn number 1014, Answering the Call of Love. Please stand in body and spirit as you are able.
Truth in our hearts is our guide. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. Sometimes we build a barrier to keep love tightly bound,
Corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear,
denying the beauty we found. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
Awesome. Please be seated. For our benediction, hope you'll indulge me. For my ordination in 2022, that was last year, yeah. And I wrote a benediction poem, yay, that talks about reverence. I don't call myself the Reverend. I prefer pastor or minister. And so I wanted to write about it, and I never delivered this poem at that ordination, so I'll read it today, if you'll indulge me. It's called Reverence, a benediction poem. Who and what is to be revered? All, full stop. On condition that there is meaning made for you. Venerate me only if it comforts you. Only as I return full reverence, rightfully bestowed. There will come a time to welcome the title wholeheartedly, I radically hope, when the villainized, marginalized, despised, dehumanized, scapegoated, feared, hated, violated are without challenge or exception no longer that. I am pastor, a shepherd of souls, and part of the whole, neither before or above it, pastored myself by the same. Loving care is my ministerial charge, service by grace unyielding, and grateful for the service in turn provided me. Other titles are welcomed with humility and pride. Call me colleague, name me friend, beloved, be loved. Still, recognize there will always be reverence for me, deserving, desiring, or not, born of basic humanity. Must recognize blessings abound, deserving, desiring, or not, forever to repay with action toward true liberty. I will call others the Reverend, rightfully claimed. I humbly request, call me other, as all are yet unconditionally that. And living into and loving into fulfillment of that promise through action in spite of the prospect of peril is calling, is sacred purpose, bold font, all caps. It is only for the love of, it is only with gratitude for those who have called me to be, those who have loved me into being, beyond parenthetically, that I admit, only then, the Reverend may be what I am, albeit there will be neither command nor demand for reverential title. Until and unless the new day arrives, with, because it's an infinite supply, reverence for all. Only along with you, beloveds, only along with all beloveds, will I ever truly, the Reverend, be love. Please place a hand on your heart. Reach out a hand to someone else in the room. Our chalice is now extinguished. We carry its light with us.